I am pumped for this. This message series is going to be awesome. Like, we have no idea what that video is talking about. There's white stuff on the ground, falling from the sky. It's like what is that, beach sand? Like, I don't know what they're doing right there. I think they call that snow, but I'm not sure. Not quite sure what that is. How many of you have your food hangover still from Thanksgiving? Yeah, me too. Me too. It's awesome. It's so cool. It's so good to just eat, man. Like, I believe I have that spiritual gift where I can just eat. I'm just good at it. I'm really, really good. Hey, we asked on our Facebook page this past week, what's your favorite Thanksgiving food? And we got a lot of different response from that. Like your normal turkey and dressing, then there was some kind of pie. Somebody said dumplings. And I was like, man, there's a lot of different personal preferences on what you like to eat for Thanksgiving. So that sparked something in me, and I was like, okay, well, let's figure out what other personal preferences we got. This is going to be fun. Y'all ready? All right, how many Black Friday shoppers? Like, you got your Black Friday all the way. You're going out. So, like, man, not as many as what I expected. Okay, how many of you would rather be set on fire than go shopping? Yeah, a lot more. Like, somebody almost jumped out of their seat right there. Okay, that's the boat I'm in. How many husbands would rather be set on fire than your wife go shopping? Okay, so here's what we need to do. We need to go back to the website, and we need to go back and listen to last week's message. Okay, and for those of y'all who are here, you'll know where I'm going with that. Hey, we're starting to record our messages now, so man, if you missed one, check out our website. They're on there. Last week's on there now. And then this week's will be on there probably Tuesday or Wednesday of the week. But we started thinking about this personal preference kind of thing. And how many of you Black Friday shoppers, you got your favorite store that you got to go to? Like, I don't care what's going on, what's happening. When Black Friday comes, you got a favorite store that you go to that you got to hit up. Nobody? Okay, yeah, okay. So 2, 3, 4. All right, cool. So you got your favorite stores. How about favorite vacation spots? Let's do this. How many of you are beach people? Yeah, a lot. How many of you are mountain people? Yeah, man, it's cooler. It's cooler up there to me. There's no reason for me to sit on the white beach that's attracting sun and burn up and get blistered and be miserable for 3 days. Like, there's no. I can just go to the mountains. It's a lot cooler up there. Okay, how about this favorite radio station, like country, rock, all that stuff? How many country fans we got? Any country fans? Couple? Yeah, hillbillies. That's what I'm talking about right there. How many rockers do we got? Rock people? Yeah, that's cool. All right. See, there's personal preferences everywhere. Like, you're driving around the Boll Weevil Circle, right? Right lane preference? Like the slow lane? Anybody in that lane? Okay, like 3 people, 4, left lane people. Okay, and you get mad if the right lane people get over in your left lane. I'm like, get over, what are you doing, right? We all have preferences. We got preferences. And what I want you to see this morning and where we're going, man, church is no different with that. Like, church is no different. Church as a whole, we thrive off of connecting people to Jesus. Okay, but here's where it gets a little tricky, and here's where it changes. The way that we connect people to Jesus changes when you go to churches all around the world. All the churches all around the world have a different preference on how they want to reach people for Jesus. Now, here's our preference. Here's for us. It's been simple. The whole entire time, from the very beginning, we wanted to be a church for people who didn't go to church. That's who we wanted to be from the very heart. And it sounds kind of crazy up at the beginning, but we wanted to be a church for people who didn't go to church. We wanted to be a church for people in Enterprise because I grew up here. I know people here. I know the stories here. Like, I know families who have been to church and they dropped out of church and haven't gone back in 10 to 15 years. I know the stories of people going to church and they've been hurt by church. Somebody in the church said something about them and it hurt their feelings and they dropped out of church. And now, instead of just not going back to that church, they just don't go back to church in general, right? There's people like that. There's people like that that they don't go because it's boring. That would be why I didn't go. How many of you, and don't talk bad about people because we don't do that, okay? But just a show of hand, how many of you have been to a boring church? Yeah, see, and a lot of people that go to boring church, they just stop going to church. They just don't go back to it, right? So you get to this place where we wanted to be a church for people who didn't go to church. So we wanted to do things a little bit differently as a church to reach those people so that they would come in and go, man, this isn't like every other church that I've been in. Like, we have a preference in the way that we do church and the things that we do, the music that we play. We have a preference in how we want to do that, and it's all based around we wanted to reach people who didn't go and who don't go to church. Now, where does that take us? In this message series we're calling The Journey. Okay, this is where we're going with this. Over the next month, okay, all the way through the end of December, we're going to see how our journey as a church, okay, our journey as a church, all the way up to 11 weeks old today. Yeah, 11 weeks old today. It's a big deal. Like, we're an old church now. It's big. But our journey as a church connected with your journey as an individual, and we want to see those connect and collide. And when they connect, you see the journey of Jesus and the life that he lived and how to reach people far from God. So over the next month, man, we're going to talk a lot about the heart and the vision of our church. We're going to talk about how our heart and our vision of our church can't happen without your journey as an individual and as a Christ follower. And we want to see how those connect so that we can reach people who don't go to church. So you ready for the journey? Yeah? Okay, like 3 people are good for that. That's all right. Let's go to Matthew chapter 2 if you got your Bible. Matthew chapter 2. If you don't have your Bible, that's cool. We got some words on the screen. And if you don't have a Bible and you didn't bring it because you don't have one to bring, hey, listen, we don't want you to leave here without getting one, or at least telling somebody and us getting you one. So when you leave today, if you'll head back to the left, the gray tent back there, tell somebody, man, I don't have a Bible. And we'll get you a Bible. We'll get you one so that you can follow along. But here's the thing about this story that we're going to dig into today. Even if you're like an unchurched person, you hadn't been to church in a long time, you're one of those stories that I said or situations that I talked about a second ago. You went, somebody hurt your feelings, you ain't been back, and you're here this morning just because we got free cookies and coffee. I mean, whatever reason that you came, I'm just glad you're here, right? I'm just glad you're here. But even if you don't know a whole lot about the Bible, you're not familiar with the whole church thing, you know something from this story that we're about to jump into, okay? And it's this. How many of you have a nativity scene at your house right now that you've got up? Okay, so you decorated too early. Okay, we just celebrated Thanksgiving. Oh, Thanksgiving is a holiday. Like, we got to give the turkey his due. Okay, now, how many of you have nativity scenes that are going to go up for Christmas? Okay, a little bit more. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. How many of you have ever seen a nativity scene? Yes. Okay, and all of you who didn't raise your hand, you're probably lying. But it's cool. If you haven't seen one, I'll show you one day. But there's a couple of common characters in the nativity scene, right? You got Mary and you got Joseph, and you got the camels and the donkey, and you got sweet baby Jesus, right? You watch Talladega Nights, you'll get that line. If you didn't, you're clueless on that. But you got sweet baby Jesus, and then you got the shepherds, and then you got another group of people, which are the wise men. That's awesome. See, they know the nativity scene. You got the wise men. And what I want you to see is that we can learn something here from the journey of the wise men. We can learn something that I think and I believe that if we can take hold of it and we can apply it to our life, it will change our spiritual journey as individuals, and it'll change our journey as a church. And here's what I want you to grab. Okay, here's what I want you to grab. God's called you to be a connector. Okay, God's called you to be a connector. Go back up for me one time there. We're not responsible for what? Saving. And you better be glad of that. Because if you do something bad to me and you make me angry and I'm responsible for saving you, I'm sending a lightning bolt to you and I'm going to fry you like bacon, son. Like, I'm for real. Like, I'm glad that I'm not in charge of saving people, because half of you wouldn't make it. Like, you would all fry. It would just be bad. So we're not responsible for saving people, but we're responsible for what? Connecting people. We're called to be connectors. Okay, and that's what I want to get to today. We're called to be connectors. And when our journey as a church and your journey as an individual meet and we become connectors, we start walking on God's journey and he starts changing people's hearts and lives. So we're going to see this. Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Now that's important. Okay, that's important, and we're going to come back to it. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi, that's the wise men, from the east came to Jerusalem. Now, I've read this passage like hundreds of times, and I always skip through that. It's like I don't even slow down. It's like I get through that and I never paid any attention. But I started looking at from the east, like what is he talking about? Like I don't know. And I started doing some research, and people say that these wise men or the Magi would have came from what we would now know as Iraq and Iran, what they called Persia back then. But they would go from Persia to Jerusalem and then eventually into Bethlehem. Now that's not an easy journey. Okay, that's not like hopping on a Delta flight and you getting there and like with your Panera Bread stuff and your Starbucks gift. That's not how it went down. It was a hard journey, but they traveled from Persia to Jerusalem and eventually into Bethlehem. Now that's important for where we're going in a minute, so don't forget that. They traveled from where? Persia to Jerusalem and eventually into Bethlehem. Great job, man. I'm so proud of you guys. It's awesome. But here's what's interesting to me is the second verse. So the Magi asked, where's the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star. We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Now, does anybody else find that strange? No? Yeah? I was blown away by that. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what does that mean you saw a star? His star. Like, what are you talking about? You saw that. So I started researching this thing, and I looked at what Bible scholars said, people who are, way smarter than I will ever be. Like people who just have time to just sit and do nothing but read and study and pray. Like I'm never going to get to that part, that intellectual side of things. So people who are way smarter than me say that what the wise men were doing here when they were looking at the star, they were actually doing what the Old Testament would call a sin. So they were living in sin. See, they were looking at the stars. They were gazing at the stars. They were looking to the star to tell their future. They were essentially worshiping the stars. Now, that isn't uncommon, right? I mean, like tribes and people groups back in the day, they used to do that all the time. You've heard of that. Like you've heard of people worshiping the sun god and the moon god, and you've heard of all of that stuff. So they were worshiping the star. But what I want you to see is they knew there was something supernatural about the star, but they didn't know the one who had breathed them into existence. They knew there was something supernatural, but they didn't know the one who actually spoke them into being. So they were living in sin, from what the Old Testament would say. God had told the Israelites, don't do that. Like, don't worship the stars. Worship me. I'm the one who created the stars. So they were doing what God said not to and living in sin. But what I want you to see is that God doesn't show up and go, hey, you got to knock that off. Like I already told you 100 times before that you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be go to your room and I'll take away your Xbox and your PlayStation and I'll take it all away because you're doing what you shouldn't be. He doesn't come up and he doesn't do that. What he does is he connects with their heart through where they were. He says, you're going to look at the stars? Then I'll use the stars. I'll use the stars to connect to your heart, to take you from where you are to where you need to be. That is important. You need to remember that. Like God looks at these people and says, I love you so much that I'm going to put a star in the sky to connect to your heart, to ultimately lead you to somebody who will change your heart. That's what God does. And as followers of Jesus, we have to do the same thing, right? If you're a follower of Jesus, if you call yourself a Christian, we've got to do the same thing. We're not called to condemn people. We're called to connect people to Jesus. Did you get that? We're not called to what? Condemn people. We're called to connect them. God didn't come down to the wise men and say, man, you shouldn't do that. I'm going to condemn you for what you're doing. He said, no, you're looking at the stars, and I'm going to use where you are to connect with your heart, to lead you to somebody who will ultimately change your heart. And I read that this morning to our team. John 3:17. For God did not send Jesus into the world to do what? Condemn. Thank you. Somebody listen this morning. He didn't send Jesus into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. Does anybody not yes, I'm proud of that. I'm glad that Jesus didn't come here to condemn me. He came here to save me. And as followers of Jesus, we've got to have that mentality. If we're going to be a church for people who don't go to church, then we're going to have some people walk into our building that don't look like you, and don't act like you, and don't smell like you, and don't listen to the same music that you listen to. But if we're going to be like God, we've got to get to a place where we're more concerned with connecting with people instead of condemning people. Because how many of you know when you condemn people, that's the last place they want to go? It's to a place they know that they're going to get condemned. They want to go to a place that has something for them. They want to go to a place that has hope. They want to go to a place that has purpose. They want to know that their life matters. So when we get to the place where we want to connect with their lives, then we're going on the same journey that God went on when he was reaching the wise men. Okay, so let's go on. Let's go on to the next one. Right here. You and I were meant to be what? Don't forget that. You and I were meant to be connectors, not condemners. You and I were meant to be connectors, to connect with people that God has placed in our life, to lead them to somebody who will ultimately change who they are. Right? So let's go to the next one here. Matthew 2, chapter 2, verse 3 says, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. When he heard, where's the one born king of the Jews? When he heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. And they knew. They were in Jerusalem. This is taking place in Jerusalem. They knew where Jesus was going to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied. See, and then he goes on, for this is what the prophet has written, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Now, here's what I want you to know about Bethlehem. Okay? Bethlehem is they say, is 6 miles from Jerusalem. People say if you stand in Jerusalem and look down the hill, I've never been there, I want to go, but when you look down the hill from Jerusalem, you can see Bethlehem from Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem was the epicenter of religious activity. That's where this little Bible study thing took place. That's where the priests were. That's where the scribes were. That's where the Pharisees were. That's where the Sadducees. Everybody who was anybody in the religious stature was where? In Jerusalem, right? But Jesus wasn't born in Jerusalem. He was born where? In Bethlehem. See, from the very beginning, God said, I want you to know that I'm not concerned with the people that think they have it all together. I want to be born in the mess, not in the religion. I want to be born in the mess because Bethlehem was nasty. Do a little research on that. Type that into Google and be like, what was Bethlehem like when Jesus lived? And you'll see it was not a cool place. You would not want to vacation there. I promise you, you take 2 weeks off of work, Bethlehem's the last place that you would want to go. It was nasty, but from the very beginning of Jesus' life, he said, I want to be sure that people know that I'm concerned with people who are messed up. And I'm thankful for that because I'm here to tell you, I'm a jacked up person. Thank you. One person knows me. I am messed up. I got a bunch of junk in my life. And if Jesus would have been born in Jerusalem, I would have thought, well, you had to act a certain way, and you had to do certain things, and you had to be of a certain stature to even connect with Jesus. But from the very beginning of his birth, he didn't decide to be born in Jerusalem. He was born where? In Bethlehem, to show you that he could connect right where you are, no matter where you are, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've been doing, no matter what you've been hanging around with. And he shows you from the very beginning of his birth that I'm concerned for people who are just messed up. He's concerned with people who are far from God. And from this is where we said, you know what, we want to be a church for people who don't go to church. Like, we're a church right now. We're in existence having church for people who aren't even here yet. And there's going to be people walk in, and if they see a culture of, you know what, listen, they're just real. They're just messed up people like I'm messed up, right? Look to your neighbor and say, you're messed up. Now look to the one that you didn't like the most, right? See, you had favorites in that moment. Look to that other person and say, you're jacked up. See, now you said that. Now I don't have to say that to them. Thank you. Very, very, but Jesus connects with people from the very beginning of his birth, saying, man, I'm concerned with people who are far from God. And then it goes on, and here's what I want you to know right here. It says, then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. And as soon as you find him, report to me. And then watch this, so that I too may go and worship him. That was a bold-faced lie. Like, he didn't want to worship him. He wanted to kill him. That's another message for another day. After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the what? The what? The star. So God's still using the star to connect with the wise men's heart. Like, why hasn't he asked for change yet? You see, God's not concerned so much with your behavior as he's concerned with changing your heart. Okay, because here's the thing. We as Americans are really good at behavior modification. Okay, but behavior modification without a heart transformation still leaves you in the exact same spot that you've been. You just act a little bit better. Right? Jesus wasn't concerned with their behavior. He was concerned with changing their heart. And he says, listen, I know that you won't change until you have a reason to change. And you won't have a reason to change until you meet Jesus, who will actually do the changing in your life. So God, from the beginning, when he was messing with the Magi, when he said, you know what, I'm going to put a star in the sky to connect with your heart so that I can lead you to somebody who can change your heart, he doesn't stop that. He doesn't stop that. See, we as a church get to a place where we have people coming in and they start going through the thing, and then they don't act just like we want them to act, right? And they don't do exactly what we want them to do, and they don't act like us, and they're not as far along in their journey as we think they should be, and we give up on them. That's what we've been doing as a church. But I'm telling you, that's not what God's heart is. God's heart says, I'm going to use where you are for as long as I have to use it until you meet the person who will actually change your heart. And as this church, that's what we want to be. Like, I don't care if people come in here 150,000 times and they never accept Christ. That 150,001 time they come back and they meet the one person who can change their heart, all of those times that they've been here, we've walked with them. We've walked with them through their life. We walked with them on the journey. We've used what it was in their life to lead them to the person that can ultimately change their heart. And that's what God's doing with the wise men. He's still leading them by the star. So when the star they had seen, when it rose ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Now, that is awesome. Like, God used the star to lead the wise men to Jesus. It stopped over Jesus. Now, here's where we are in this. I'm looking at that going, man, I got a family member, and I got a friend, and I got a coworker that are far from you. God, why can't you just send them a star? Right? Wouldn't that be awesome? Like, you've been talking to somebody about Jesus for so long, and then all of a sudden they come to you one day and they're like, and like you look over the shoulder, and it's like, there's a star. That would be so awesome. God, could you do that for us? Could you send a star so that my family member or my friend or my coworker can see that, so that they could be led to you, so that you could change their heart. Can you just send them a star? But here's what we have to realize. He's already sent them a star. And you're the star. You're the star. God wants to use you to connect them to Jesus. You're the star. Me and you are meant to be what? Connectors. Right? God wants to use you where you are in your sphere of influence to connect people to himself. He wants to use you. Listen, none of us have a relationship with anybody on this planet by accident. Like, God put you in somebody's life so that you could not condemn them, but you could connect them to Jesus. God intended for us to be connectors. Go down one, Ashley. Matthew chapter 2, verse 10, it says, when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. So he's still using the what? He's still using the star. And the star just landed over where Jesus was born, right? So he's still using the star. When they saw it, they were overjoyed. Now here's what's cool. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. That's the story that you know, right? That's the Christmas story. They got there, they saw Jesus, and they poured out some gifts. And having been warned in a, okay, so something just changed, right? So how were they led to Jesus? They were led by a star. Now all of a sudden the star led them to Jesus, and now all of a sudden they're not being led by a star, they're being led by a dream. So God used the star as much as he had to use the star to get them to the place where they could meet Jesus. And when they met Jesus, they no longer looked to the star to lead them. They listened to Jesus to lead them. See, that's powerful. So they heard in a dream. They listened to God, not to go back to Herod. And then this is even cooler. Then they returned to their country by another route. They returned to their country by another route. See, when you meet Jesus, you can't stay the same. I guess spiritual impossibility. You can't meet Jesus and stay the same. God is the only one who can change the routes in our life. He's the only one. Your life is not going down the route or down the path that you wanted it to go to. There's only one person who can change your route. There's only one person, and he shows it to you in this story. He leads these wise men, these magi, by a star to Jesus, but when they met Jesus, they changed. They stopped listening, or they stopped looking to the star, and they started listening to Jesus. He uses what's in your life to connect you to the heart of Jesus so that he could change your heart, not modify your behavior. Because for so long we've thought as a church that we had to act a certain way and to do a certain thing. And when people come in, we go, man, you can come in here, but, right? That's a big but. Like, but you're going to have to stop what you're doing. Like, you're going to have to do a little extra. You're going to have to change some things about your behavior. But God's not interested in changing your behavior. He's interested in changing your what? Heart. And when we get to a place in our life where we go, you can go down to that next one. When we go, God, I want to be a connector. When we get to a place in our life where we get so consumed by this thought of going, you know what, I just want to lead people to Jesus. When we get to a place that we go, I just want to be a connector. Like I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to save people. I'm not in charge of that. I don't know anything else. All I know is that I need to connect people to Jesus. And when we get to that place, it changes our spiritual journey as an individual, and then it starts to change our journey as a church. Now here's what we've done. We've tried to make becoming a connector pretty easy for you. Okay? Like, we've created an environment to where you can bring your friends, you can bring your family, you can bring your coworkers, you can bring your aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews. You can bring them and not be worried that we're going to do something weird or freaky. Like, we created that spot on purpose. Like, we're not playing with snakes. Okay, we're just not doing that, because one day you're going to come in and we're going to be playing with snakes, and you're going to have like 17 different friends that are with you that need to meet Jesus, and instead of meeting Jesus, they go, dude, that's weird. Right? How many of you would say, dude, that's weird? I ain't ever come back there. So we created a place so that you could invite your friends, invite your family, and know that we're not going to do something weird, and we're not going to make them feel awkward, and we're not going to make first-time guests stand up and come down in the front and tell us their deepest, darkest secrets while they sing a song. Like, we're not doing all that. Like, we wanted to be a church that created an environment that would be conducive for you to become a connector. So, when you walk out this morning, you go to the gray tent, and you'll see these cool little green cards. Pick you up a couple. This is an easy way for you to be a connector. When you're in a Walmart line, or when you're in a friend or a buddy, you're in a conversation, and you're just talking about stuff and Christmas, and hey man, just check this out. And we'd love to have you. And then when they show up, you know for sure that we're not going to do anything freaky and weird to creep them out. Like, we're not about that. We're not going to do that. We're just going to create a space, create an engaging environment where people can come and learn, trust, and follow Jesus. So when we become a connector, it changes our journey. It changes our spiritual journey. And we wanted to create a place that will be conducive for you to become a connector. Because here's what I know, and here's what the wise men found out. That behavior modification only goes so far. Right? Like, you can't go to heaven with behavior modification. You only get to heaven by a heart transformation. And we wanted to lead people to Jesus because he's the only one that can change your heart. Now, for so long as a society and for so long as a church, we've been good at creating behavior modification guidelines, telling you what you should and shouldn't do, right? Something go wrong in our government, what do we tend to do? We just make another law, right? We just make another law. We just make another rule. We just do something, we just post something else up, no trespassing here, and expect people to pay attention to it. Well, listen, people aren't going to pay attention to behavior modifications when they see a church and when they see an individual so focused on not condemning them, but connecting them to hope and a future and a purpose, to connecting them to Jesus. Then they start to get to that place where they're ready to accept what you've got to say to them. And we need more heart transformation instead of more behavior modification. Because if we had heart transformation, we wouldn't have the deal that we've got going on right now in Ferguson. Listen, you know I'm going to talk about it. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And see, here's our deal as a church and our deal as individuals. We know exactly what we would do if we were in a spot to do anything about it. Right? We know exactly what we would do. And then we go on Facebook and then we post about what we would do. And we post about what we shouldn't do and what's going on and taking place. And then we talk about how this white kid got gunned down by a black police officer and nobody else is talking about that. And we're getting to this place of just making a ruckus about all of this stuff. None of that is going to change until hearts are transformed. And the only people that can change hearts is Jesus. He's the only one that can change the difficult situations in our life. He's the only one that can change the difficult situations in our world. And we're not going to be a church that sits here and goes, man, I'm more concerned with your behavior. I could care less about your behavior. Because I know when your heart gets connected to Jesus, he starts to change that, then you will turn into exactly who he has called you to be. I have no place in that. I'm not responsible for saving people. I'm responsible for what? Connecting people. And we need to connect people and show them hope. That's what Ferguson needs. They don't need another law. They don't need another riot. They don't need another whatever post on Facebook. They don't need that. They need to know that there's a hope and that there's a future and that there's a purpose And the only one that can give those things is the only one that can change your heart. And the only one that can change your heart is who? Jesus. So as a church, we're going to be more concerned with leading people and connecting people to Jesus instead of modifying their behavior. Because when you get a church on fire about being a connector, then life starts to change. Right? Lives start to change. In 10 weeks, 18 people have accepted Christ as their Savior. That blows me away every single time. Every single time. 13 people just got baptized, 8 of which of those made a decision to follow Jesus since we opened the doors of our church. That's what happens when you connect people to Jesus. That's what happens when you connect people to the one person that can give them hope and that can give them a future and that can give them purpose. That's the one person who can ultimately change your life. And that's the one person that can ultimately change our city. Now, here's what I believe. I believe that Jesus wants to do that. Like, I believe that Jesus wants to change you and me as individuals, but he wants to change the city, and he wants to change the state, and he wants to change our country and our nation. He wants to do that, and the world. Jesus wants to do that, but he does that by changing us into connectors. When you and I become connectors, when you and I become so focused on connecting people to Jesus, that's when your journey changes. And that's when our journey as a church changes. And then that's when our city changes. And then that's when our state, that's when our nation, that's when our world starts to change. When people become concerned about connecting with people instead of what? Condemning people. So here's my heart this morning. I'm just going to lay it out on the table. And you can do what you want with this. But my heart for this church and my heart for us as individuals is that we would get to a place where you go, man, listen, the only hope that we have, it doesn't come from any form of government. The only hope we have is Jesus. And we got to get people to Jesus. And we got to do whatever we got to do as a church to get people to Jesus. Whether that's playing music that you don't like, whether that's doing some things that are weird to you, whether that's being a different church, we got to do whatever we got to do to connect people to Jesus. God used the what? Star to connect the Magi all the way until they met Jesus. And when they met Jesus, they stopped looking at the star and they started listening to Jesus. We'll do whatever we have to do as a church to get people in the seats so that they can connect with Jesus, so that Jesus can ultimately change their heart. Because here's what I know. When you live life without Jesus, you feel like you're running an uphill battle, and it never gets easier. And it's so difficult. And there's so much junk on your plate. There's so much stress, and there's so much worry, and there's so much anxiety, and you got all this mess going on, and then you got to walk out in public and act like you're all okay, and you got everything together, and that just creates more problems, and you got to wear this mask here, and you got to wear that mask over there, and we get to a place where we're just fed up and tired. And Jesus says, come to me and I will give you rest. I won't give you condemnation. I want to give you rest. I want to give you love. And I want to change your heart. Because when I change your heart, I'm the only one that can create a new path and a new route for your life to go. Now here's what I want you to hear this morning. And everybody, you can bow your head, close your eyes, nobody looking around. I just want you to hear this. If you're in here this morning and you're going, man, it's hard. My life's difficult. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I'm lost. I feel like I'm treading water and not getting anywhere. And I don't know if I've ever truly been connected to that Jesus person that you're talking about, but I really want to give it a try. If he's the only one that can change my heart, and he's the only one that can change my life, and the only one that can send me on a new route, I want to give that a try. I'm so worn out living the life that I've been living. I want to do something differently. Here's what I want to ask you. With every head bowed, every eye closed, if that's you and you're going, man, I just want to get connected to Jesus. Like I've never been connected. I don't know really if I am connected. I just want to connect with Jesus. If that's you, all I want you to do is I just want you to raise your hand. We're not going to do anything weird. We're not going to call you out. We're not going to point you out. I just want you to raise your hand. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Listen, Jesus is the only one that can change your situation. Jesus is the only one that can give you hope. Jesus is the only one that can give you a future. Okay, so I want to say something real quick, and I'm going to ask something of you. But if this is your situation, you're not going to be afraid to stand up. How many of you, okay? How many of you heard about this church and you said, I'm just going to check it out. I'm just going to check it out. I don't know. I'm just going to check it out. And you came. And in this church, you got connected to Jesus. And in this church, God created a new route for your life. And God's starting to work in your life. And He's starting to use you in this church. And you get to the place where you have a new hope and you have a new future. And you're excited about life and not depressed about it all the time. How many of you have met Jesus in this church and He started connecting with you? If that's you, all I want you to do, I just want you to stand right now where you are. Just stand. Nobody looking around yet. Just stand. If that's you, I just want you to stand. You got connected to Jesus from this church. You gave your heart, you gave your life to Jesus in this church. You made a decision to follow Jesus in this church. Now here's the thing. I just want you to open up your eyes and I just want you to look around. I just want you to look. That's what God does to a heart. That's what God does to a life. That's what God does to families. That's what God does to individuals. He changes the journey that we're on, and He gives us from not a dead-end road to a road that leads to hope and a future and of prosperity. And when we get to a place where we're focused on Jesus and connecting to Jesus, then we get to a place where we can give everything that's been weighing us down and we can lay it at the feet of Jesus, and He takes it all. And He just gives us nothing but rest. Listen, these are the hearts and the lives that have been changed. Come on. Come on. Because of this church, because of what you're doing in the church, because of what you're giving to the church, Jesus is changing hearts and changing lives. You guys can be seated right there. Thank you so much for that. From now on, especially in this month of December that we're going in, I don't ever want you to forget what that looked like. Because what I want to happen at the beginning of the year is that a group of people get so fired up about being connectors that we just want to connect people to Jesus, that we start inviting people to church service after church service after church service, knowing that at some point, doing what we're doing is going to lead them to Jesus, and He's ultimately going to change their lives. And at the beginning of the year, I want more people to stand up. Don't you? I want more people to stand up in your seats. Like, I want more people there, not to bring glory for us, but because we know that behavior modification isn't happening, but heart transformation is taking place in this place. And listen, that's why we came here. That's what we want to be as a church. That's what I want you to see as people who come to our church and members of our church. I want you to see people standing up every time you come in here. I want you to see people connecting to Jesus, because that's where we need to lead people, because that's the place that has hope. And that's the place that has a future. Amen? Come on, man. That's good stuff right there. That is good stuff. Good stuff. Go ahead and stand with me real quick. I'm going to pray for us, and then you're going to be dismissed.